Hello, everyone. In today's episode, I am joined by an old colleague who now works as the quality lead for a blood sciences department. He also possesses wit faster than a supercar, but is also drier than the desert. Paulo, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Quite a nice introduction, I would say.
I don't want to say too
Let's
much, but
put it to the test. Yeah.
I think that covers your personality quite nicely.
Oh, thank you. It was a good one.
Thank you. You said you wanted to say something. You had a disclaimer to say. Do you want to say that now?
Yeah, so I just want to say, all opinions are my own. Whatever we'll discuss, whatever the conversation takes us, the bottom line is you should have quality procedures in your own labs. You should follow them, follow your SOPs. What I'm about to discuss, what we are about to discuss, all opinions are my own, maybe based on facts and experiences that I've had. Your experience may vary. So ultimately, whatever your SOPs and your quality procedures state, you should take that and then just improve on them. If this conversation helps you improve anything in your lab, amazing. But don't go against any procedures that you may have just because of something that you heard here.
Thank you. And you're right, everyone should follow the local procedures. It's something that we should state more often as well. You know, you go to these conferences, you go to these talks, but it's always very important to follow what your lab has, put in place. Okay, so let's start. I've got a question for you, and this might be one of the hardest questions I will ask. And the other topics will come up from what we discussed today. But how do you define quality when speaking about it from a laboratory perspective? What does quality mean to you?
Right. So there's multiple things that we can say about it. There's multiple ways that we can approach it. I would say one of the most realistic and cold-hearted ones is management of expectations. And some of you may have heard examples like this before, but let's just assume what do I mean when I talk about management of expectations? So let's assume that you go out, you want to buy a new phone, right? And you actually want to pamper yourself. So you have a bit of money and you want to go for the top-notch one. You really want to put your money in there and you just pay and buy a very expensive phone. After you start using your phone, you start notice that, it's sluggish, it's slow, photos are bad, you're really not happy with that phone at all. So when you went out and you decided, you made a conscious choice of spending a good amount of money on that product, you had a set of expectations. You were expecting it to be the best phone available, the best camera possible, fast, reliable, and it even makes phone calls. So you'd expect all of that to be there. But then if your experience as a user is not matching your expectations, that's where your perception of the quality of the product starts being affected, right? If you had chosen to, I just need something that makes phone calls, gets me some messages sent, received, whatever, I'll spend £20, even if the battery dies after an hour, or even if the screen doesn't work whenever the sun shines, you'd be like, yeah, it's £20, can't complain, still works, it's amazing, does whatever I paid for. So yeah, it's about managing expectations. So bringing this back into the lab, obviously, how do you do that? So you'd have things such as service level agreements, where you basically set conversations with your users, with your clients, which could be hospital sites, GPs, whoever uses your service, where you sit at the table with them at the beginning of delivery of the service or initial conversations, and you say, okay, this is what I have to offer. This is what you can expect from me. Now tell me, what do you need? What are your conditions? Where can we meet in the middle and make sure that this works for both of us? Every time that you have these conversations, you need to make sure that they are realistic and that you are leveling and being honest about what you what you can deliver, and at the same time, again, manage the expectations of the people that you are dealing with. You can't simply promise someone a molecular result in 5 minutes, because you'd be setting yourself to fail. So yeah, if these conversations are realistic, if these contracts are realistic, if the expectations are met or are leveled from the beginning, you have very good basis to start providing a service which will meet their expectations. And then in terms of the day to day, is just making sure that everything that you do is with your patients at the heart of whatever you are producing. I'm sure I'm not breaking the news to anyone when I'm saying that in pathology, right result of the right patient in a timely manner, that's the basics of whatever we are doing. So, whenever you are looking at the result, whenever you are troubleshooting a machine, whenever you are doing any of the activities that you are doing in the lab, just remember that there's a patient on the other side of that sample, and that you are basically doing the best that you can to deliver the most reliable set of results to them. If you ask me, probably I would struggle to separate quality from what we do, and I'm thinking about people that say, oh, I'm really struggling. I don't have time to do any of this quality stuff. How can you separate quality from what you do on the day to day? If you are troubleshooting a machine, if you are running a QC, if you are signing the sheet that you say to say that you have done that, if you are looking at the sample and at the labeling to make sure that you're running the right sample, if you're looking at the tests to make sure that you're doing the right tests for the right sample, all of that is quality. So as long as you are following the procedures, quality is embedded in everything that you do. And if it's not, then something is improving. So probably a bit of a confusing answer, but it was a big, wide question as well. So I hope it kind of answered it.
Yeah, I really like the way you described it to going out and buying a phone. First of all, it shows that you're a tech person yourself. Um,
You know
tech,
it.
tech example, but that actually raises another question. So before we get on to why people have these negative emotions about quality, I wanted to go back to that phone example. If I, as a user, have my expectations set that I want, for instance, this phone because it does this, this, and this for me. And I'm not too worried about if it can't do, you know, A, B, and C, for example. Should we, as biomedical scientists, lower our standards because our users are not demanding the same level of quality that we, as biomedical scientists, might want to put out there? An example of this would be, I used to work in a lab where when the citrated platelet count was done, they wouldn't multiply it by the conversion factor, the 1.1, to account for the dilution caused by the sodium citrate anticoagulant. And the reason for that was because the consultants had said they didn't care too much, it wasn't significant for them. But me as a scientist, I thought that was wrong. I thought as a biomedical scientist, I had a duty to produce the best and most accurate results I could, regardless of what anyone else says. So what do you say about that? If our users are saying they don't want the quality and you're providing the quality for them, is it okay to lower your standards?
I think that's a very complex question. In an ideal world, the answer is absolutely, you are right. Never lower your standards. And as a biomedical scientist, as a registered biomedical scientist, we have the code of conduct, and part of it is to make sure that you are responsible for the results that you're releasing, and need to make sure that they are accurate, and to the best of your knowledge, you are offering the best possible results to your patients. But I've also come across things of they are just using it for trending. So if you are reporting the wrong one, as long as it's always wrong on the same level, it doesn't matter, because it's for trending purposes. So the reality is, in an ideal world, yes, absolutely, never lower your standards. In the real world, it's again going back to the management of expectations, because obviously, the NHS is struggling for funding. You don't want to be paying for something to be at level 100 if the level 50 will be more than enough for what you need. So again, have the conversations. SLA is extremely important. Service level agreements, meet in the middle. But I would never do something that would take me out of my good nights of sleep. So, as a professional, you should have a set of boundaries and lines that you are not comfortable with passing or ignoring. So, I would say again, it's a very complicated question because you can't just simply say no, absolutely not. I'll never do that, because that can bring trouble in your direction. But again, bringing this back to the quality conversation, with a good quality management system, there's always space for improvement, and I can't see why people wouldn't be open to conversations about improvements and about why are we doing things this way. Would it really add any costs in the end if we multiply the platelets, for instance? Why wouldn't we? The question would be, why wouldn't we? What difference does it make? You have all the tools, like all that you need is multiply by 1.1. Why wouldn't you? So that would be the question, and then take it from there and improve it as much as you can.
So I guess my next question leading on from this is, let's say you're moving. Biomedical scientists move around quite a lot. We move, from lab to lab, and each lab does things differently. If you notice something good, I always believe that you should try and share it with others. But if you notice something which is not right, then you should also highlight that too, so that improvements can be made. What do you think is a good way to raise these issues without ruffling too many feathers?
So again, your quality management systems should have ways that would allow you to either raise change requests or raise suggestions. If your lab is accredited, they need to follow the standards, and part of the standards is, for instance, that you need to have change request procedures or change control procedures to ensure continuous improvement. You need to have boxes for staff suggestions or emails for staff suggestions, whatever procedures you have. But you need to have that. You need to log those, and you need to have an answer to staff. So again, in an ideal world, you'll have a policy of openness, and at any moment, any member of staff can come forward and say, why are we doing things this way? I think this way would be more efficient. It would produce better results in maybe even less time than what we are producing at the moment. So why wouldn't you? And then there should be a chain of events that starts from there. Either a change control, where people would then look into, okay, what's the risk of implementing versus the risk of doing nothing? What's the benefit of implementing versus the benefit of doing nothing? And ultimately, if it is a good idea, it should be implemented. Again, unfortunately, it's not always like this, and you may struggle to make yourself heard. But going back to the preposition of the question, when you change, and from on experience, it's very easy to look at things and think, oh, why are they doing things this way? Oh, in my previous place we used to do it this way. In my previous place we used to do it that way. In my previous place it was this way and it was better. You need to get into the mindset of, instead of going directly into questioning, is this the right way of doing things? Question yourself, why are they doing things this way? And then again, I'm sure the setups would be different between one lab and the other, and I'm sure there would be processes in place that would make sure that whatever processes they implemented would be the right process at that stage, at that time, for whatever needs they had at the time. That being said, continuous improvement, you need to make sure that whenever you have a good idea, bring it forward, and everyone should be more than happy to listen to you and more than happy to invite you into the project and say, help us deliver it, help us improve our service.
I think it's also a sign of a healthy workplace as well, where you can talk about these things and you can raise issues and you can give ideas and you are heard. Even if not all your ideas are implemented, but people discuss them and they talk about them, and there is this want for continuous improvement. That's also part of why we do CPD, right? We do CPD so that we can improve, and that's a requirement of your registration too. And it was good that you mentioned the HCPC code of conduct, because I remember when I was doing my training, something one of the seniors once said to me, and it stuck by me since, was that at the end of the day, if you do something, you it's your responsibility, and also you could be asked about it by the HCPC. And if you are ever standing there in front of the HCPC, you cannot say, for example, Paolo told me to do this, or Doctor.
Well, you can. It won't save you, but you
And of
can.
course, yep, it won't have the effect that you want it to have. And so you should be able to justify what you do. If it is the procedure in the lab, then that's fine. You can say, as part of our standard operating procedure, this is what we do. It's in this SOP, and hence I did this. And that's justifiable, even if it may not technically be the best practice. It's still fine.
Yeah. Just to clarify as well, the answer to the question was from a quality point of view. There is a whole different approach if you have any concerns about safety, about endangering patients, endangering colleagues. You know, there would be whistleblower policies and all of that. I'm not touching any of that. I'm just talking about it from the point of view of improvements, staff suggestions, and all of that. Because then, if you look about it from the other side of things, from the whistleblower policies and all of that, that's I think that there's a whole different level of expectations from management when it comes to that. And as managers, everyone should be very aware that if you know that something is very wrong and someone is being endangered by something that is happening in your lab, you really need to do something. If you think about all the cases that we've been seeing on the TV about, you know, NHS services failing their patients, one of the main points that is always mentioned is that management didn't do enough, even though they knew that something was wrong. So, always make sure that you are doing the right thing.
Yep, that is very true. If you see something wrong, you should speak up, and there are avenues, there are ways of doing it. That's a very good point. And you are right, this is about quality. Otherwise, we could open a can of worms and start talking about all the different issues that are found in the NHS. But moving on, I'd like to talk a little bit about yourself and what you've done and how you've got to where you are today. I remember a few months back, we were having this conversation, and you mentioned that you would, I think at the time, you'd either finished your master's or you were still doing your master's, and that you'd done a module in quality, which really gave you an appreciation for the topic. And before we get into that, I'd like to learn a little bit more about your journey as a biomedical scientist and how it culminated to you being where you are today.
Right. So, funnily enough, I'm probably one of the few people that you'll ever hear saying that I'm a biomedical scientist by choice. Usually, people either wanted to be some sort of doctors or hematology doctor or whatever other career choices, and then they ended up being biomedical scientists because at some point they wanted to go and progress to something different. I wanted to be a biomedical scientist because I liked the lab. I liked the idea that I had of whatever competencies I would have to gain to be a proficient biomedical scientist. So I went to uni in 2007. I graduated in 2011 in Portugal, and I was always very attracted by the idea of moving to the UK. Can't really explain why, but I always found that maybe I would feel more integrated in the society here than I was in Portugal, which is maybe a weird thing to say. But yeah, then I moved into the UK in 2014. I was doing a few jobs while I was waiting for my HCPC registration to come along. And one of those jobs was being a theatre porter. So not cinema, theatres from operating rooms. Funny story. When I first met my girlfriend and I said, "Oh, I'm a theatre porter," she was like, "Oh, can you get me free tickets then?"
I
It's
thought she
like,
was going
no,
to ask for
that's not.
popcorn.
Yeah, not that one. Which then meant that I met a few people around the hospital, and then I was able to know about some opportunity that I was opening in the lab in the hospital where I was working, and it was actually for an MLA role. But at this point, I already had my HCPC registration, so I was invited for the interview. And then at some point, they said, "Well, you have your classifications, you have the knowledge, so you are clearly overqualified for this role, but we have another opening somewhere else, and we would be happy to invite you for that interview." So I applied for that one. I got invited, and I got to roll. So this was my first job as a biomedical scientist in the UK. Was a multidisciplinary biomedical scientist, and I remember the feedback from my manager at the time was that they liked the fact that they would just say, I need this done, but I don't need to direct you. You just deliver the results in the end. I was like, oh yeah, no, I like to be left alone and do things my own way, as long as everyone is happy with the way I'm doing it and the results that I'm achieving. From that, then I moved to the lab where we met, where I became, well, specialist biomedical scientist via the recognition of the portfolios that I had done in Portugal and all of that. So I became a specialist in hematology and blood transfusion, did nights, hated the nights. So I was more than happy to move away from that as soon as possible. And again, funnily enough, I actually wanted to follow the senior path within blood transfusion. It always sounded more attractive to me to follow the blood transfusion path. But then I started getting more and more involved with quality tasks, and the opportunities were coming, and the tasks that I was being assigned were in hematology, and I started getting more and more involved with that. And then the position opened. I went for the interview. I think I did quite well, even though I was probably one of the least experienced people to apply for the role. But again, I got it. I was really lucky with the team that I had with me at that point. Manager was great. My colleagues were great. Again, I can't thank enough the manager that we had at the time, because it really made me realize that there's a massive value in having conversations and challenging ourselves, and not being afraid of, you know, challenging your manager, challenging your own ideas, challenging your colleagues, as long as the main idea is that at the end of the conversation, we are in a better place with better solutions for our issues. Because if you are just surrounded by yes men or yes woman, really no one has much to learn from it. So yeah, I'm really thankful for that. That really made me learn a lot. And then again, I then went to uni, and it wasn't just one module. I actually went to Biomed Online, and I did 4 modules related to quality. And again, it was related to what I was doing on the day to day. So even though I learned a lot and it was very useful, it was on things that I was putting into practice, and it really helped me putting things in perspective and framing things. But without any doubt, the most valuable things of those courses is the experiences and the exchanges that you have with other students, and you have people from all around the country, sometimes even from abroad, people that share their experiences and the way that they do things, and it's really, really good. I'm actually still, I need to do my project to finish my master's, which is embarrassing to say, but
Oh wow.
with the little one, I had to put it in a pause at the moment. But yeah, I was the quality lead for hematology since 2019, and last year I moved on to a quality manager role. I now I'm the quality manager for hematology, biochemistry, sample reception, point of care, and blood transfusion. Yeah, I love what I do, and it challenges me every day. But yeah, I never get bored.
So I guess in the end, you finally got to where you wanted to be. You said you wanted to be a quality manager in transfusion, and though you're not exclusively in transfusion, it is part of your remit now. I just wanted to ask you. So going back to when you were in Portugal, did you work as a biomedical scientist at that point?
No, so I did my internship as part of the uni course. The way that the things work there is a bit different because your internship is part of your uni years. But then after that, it was basically impossible to find a job. It was on the back of the 2008 financial crisis. The market was really bad. So again, I was just doing a few different things over there until I decided to move to the UK.
Sure. So I wanted to ask really, how it was you ended up in hematology and transfusion? For me personally, it was more a case of, that's where the opportunity at the time was. I think we have to remember, at the end of the day, we're humans. We have got responsibilities outside work as well. And so for me at the time, it was, where can I get a job? And the job came up in hematology and transfusion. I took it. And to be fair, I'm lucky. I enjoyed that job. I loved that job. Really happy with the department I worked in. But I can't say for sure, had I worked in genetics or had I worked in, you know, immunology or something else, I would have enjoyed that too. So, I can't complain. Was hematology something that you chose, or was it just things fell into place at the right time in the right place?
It's funny that you say that because just the other day I was saying to one of my colleagues that if my hematology teacher from uni learned from my career path and where I am at the moment, should be saying absolutely no way. This guy, no way, because I actually struggled with hematology when I was at uni. Um, but then, as you say, it's just when we graduate in Portugal, we graduate as multidisciplinary biomedical scientists. So I could have gone into infection sciences, I could have gone into genetics, I could have gone anywhere else. The opportunity was in a multidisciplinary lab within blood sciences. So that's where I ended up. I actually loved microbiology when I was at university, but then now just the smell of the plates is just like, why did I love that so much? But I really found it fascinating, and it was probably one of the disciplines where you still had less automation, and I always found that really interesting. And then within blood sciences, exactly the same thing. Probably hematology and blood transfusion were the most manual, more blood transfusion than hematology, and that always was the path that I chose because I really wanted to get my hands like I don't want to be mean, but I just didn't want to load and unload samples in one of the machines. It doesn't mean like that's the only thing you do, because absolutely not. There's so much more to it. But I really wanted. I love the fact that you need to really focus and really put your mind to manual cross matches and troubleshooting panels and stuff like that. I really like that, and that's where it took me.
Sure. One of the other really interesting and nuggets of gold that you shared was that you should surround yourself with people who are willing to challenge you, and you should be willing to challenge others too, whether it's, colleagues on your same level, the people that you work with on your shift, your seniors, your managers. I know I used to ask a lot of questions, and you know this, you were my senior in the lab one time. And I think it's very important because there's this quote that one of my friends shared with me recently, which goes towards to the effect of, you only grow when you step out of your comfort zone. And you can only do that if you're willing to hear opinions from others which may not agree with what you think or your views. And that's not just something that should apply to the lab. I think it applies in life in general. We can have this conversation about, some of the issues and the misinformation that was spread during the pandemic, for example, was because people did not open themselves to listen to other viewpoints or to be willing to be receptive to that. Anyway, I digress a little bit. So let's bring it back to quality, the thing that we're meant to be talking about. So you spoke about challenging, others if you saw something was not right, or just trying to get some clarification. And I want to get some clarification from you too. Quality is, I think, misunderstood by many. And during my time in the lab, I've heard many people rumbling about quality this and quality that. And some people would say that it takes them away from the actual science of doing things because you get bogged down with unnecessary paperwork. Why do you think quality evokes such negative emotions? And do you think this is justified?
Um, Obviously, I'll say no, right? Because I'm a quality manager. But I think it's partly due to something that I've touched already, which is the separation of quality from the operational side of things. So the separation from, or the fact that some people view it as something that they need to do in addition to the day-to-day job, instead of being just the part of whatever you are doing. Because again, something that you probably heard is, if there's no records, it wasn't done, right? So if you are doing troubleshooting, if you are running QCs, you know that you need to do that as part of producing results and issuing bloods and whatever. But again, if you're not creating records along the way, what's the point? Part of the reason might be as well, that maybe, and as a quality manager, I have a role playing in that. As senior biomedical scientist, you have a role to play in that. You really need to start including people, and we really need to start including people from all bands, from all levels of experience, in all sorts of tasks, right? So one of the one of the best feedbacks, and the most that made me the proudest, from one of the assessments that we had with UCAS, was that they had never been to a lab where they felt that MLA staff were so confident and so knowledgeable like they were where we were working before. And I think that was a real victory, because you know if you don't open people to experiences, if you are training someone and just say, you grab sample, you load it there, you do it that way, you never, 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 never do it that way, but you don't explain why, what's the benefit in that? You need to explain, okay, we do it this way because for whatever reason we found out that if you do it the other way, this will happen, which will have this effect on the sample, which will result in this and this and this and this. It takes a bit more time, but at the same time, people will understand the consequences of their actions. So they won't be curious to say, okay, they said never, never, never do that. What happens if I do? So, it's like, don't touch the red button. You go there and you touch it. But really, it's just, include people in your decisions. The same thing that sometimes people struggle with, we have 4 forms for that, and now he included another signature. I need, on top of everything else, there's another signature that I have. Okay, did someone explain to them why that signature needs to be there? Did someone explain that, maybe we had an incident and clearly this was the resolution, or clearly there was a gap there that we needed to do things this way and not that way? Instead of doing that, you just go in and say, yeah, from now on, just sign it there. People will be frustrated. And obviously, if you are already dealing with a very busy shift, your workload is insane, and you still have more and more and more paperwork to deal with, you will be frustrated. But what you need to understand, and what people need to understand when they are on the other side as well, is when you are making these changes, be open and just explain to staff why they are being done, why things are being done that way. Just make sure that you explain to them why they need to follow the procedure and the consequences of not following the procedure. Specifically around records, this is a very dramatic example, but I like to say to people, you remember things that happened yesterday. Most of us do. But if in 6 months' time, we receive something from a coroner saying, can you provide details about something that happened 6 months ago, because I'm just looking into this and I need explanations on that. Will you be able to go back to them and explain everything that happened in detail and justify your actions and your decisions? If you don't have records, if you don't have appropriate records and investigations and timelines and blah, blah, even though they may seem like overkill at the moment that you are doing it, just bear in mind that you are creating records for the future, not for now. And again, if those records don't exist, you may come to me in 6 months and say, oh, I always did it because me, I've always done it. If there's no records, there's no records, right? So I'll say, just bottom line, people need to be more open about reasons why we do things. Bring people on board from day one. Just everyone should have an induction, which should include quality management system. Should give them a brief overview of quality manual, quality policy, the way things work, basics of good documentation, good record keeping, and all of that, and then just build on that. Just keep bringing people back. Just If there's an incident or if there's a shared learning opportunity, just ask people to do a presentation. Just ask people to share with colleagues. If they see something interesting, just start a CPD program. Just make people come on board and do things and share and make their voices heard. Some people will complain. Some people will love it. Some people will complain at the beginning and love it in the end. There's not one size fits all, but I think it's about making people understand that quality is within what you do daily, not on top of what you do daily.
I think the one thing that really struck a chord with me, and I didn't think of it this way ever until now, was when you said we don't make records for today, we make them for tomorrow, or we make them for the future. And when you think about it that way, it makes sense. I struggle to remember what I had for breakfast in the morning, let alone what I was doing 6 months ago and whether I ran a QC or did something. So that's a very, very good point. And then going back to something you said even before that was about empowering your staff. And I've noticed in some places the issue that we have is that people are quick to say, "Oh, but they're just a band 2 MLA. We don't expect them to know this." And I've always argued that you should empower staff to be better, not give them reasons to be worse. And then, of course, I'm not saying that MLA should start doing BMS tasks. Obviously not, because they're not registered. There's some things that they can't do. But within the remit of their role, they should do what what their job description states to the best of their ability, not, find shortcuts, and then we justify those shortcuts. But also, I guess that is linked intricately with training as well. If you've got a good training environment, then you can do that. But if training is something that the lab struggles with in general, then you're not going to have time to train anyone more than they need to be trained. And then you're just running on the bare minimum, as it were.
That is a good point. And again, there will be different experiences and different setups and different settings. But what I always struggled to put in my head was that training opportunities are on the bench, are on the day to day. Sometimes you don't need to book an hour and book a day or book a slot of time to say, yeah, I'm going to train you on that. Particularly if you just want to give some little nuggets of knowledge to people, you can just go in and you say, someone comes to you and say, oh, I've been trying to troubleshoot this. I can't really get my hand around it. Like, okay, just instead of taking over and say, yeah, you go and do something else, just, take 2 minutes and say, okay, this is what's going on. This is why, and blah, blah, and just explain to them and bring them on. Just don't say, yeah, fine, I'll deal with it. Just go and do something else. Again, sorry, you may be struggling and you may really be, you really need that person to go and cover you while you troubleshoot, and that's fine. But most of the days you will find a couple of minutes where you can just bring people on board and say, this is why you do things, this is how you do it. And the next time they will try and they will fix it themselves and they'll find things themselves and they come to you and say, oh, I found this and I actually found out that if you do it this way, it's actually better. Great. Everyone learns.
I know you said that you didn't like doing nights, you hated them, but I was the opposite. I enjoyed nights and weekends because there were less people and I could do exactly what you just mentioned. I could spend time with the MLAs and, ask them questions about what they're doing and why they're doing it, but also sharing with them some of my knowledge too. Most of the MLAs that we've had, they've aspired to be biomedical scientists in the future. Not all of them, but most of them. And so by sharing some of my knowledge, when we're just sitting around filing samples, I'm on the analyzer and they're sitting behind me, I can talk to them. You can talk while you're still doing what you're doing and you can share bits of knowledge. And I really enjoy doing that. So, on the night shifts, I would get the MLAs to run QCs in transfusion just to show them or teach them how blood grouping works. It's not a part of their requirements, but the more they do, the more they understand the importance of something, and then you can talk about why it's important too, and it starts that conversation. Or when you're looking at FPC results and low platelets, just asking them why do you think low platelets occur, and see how much they know, and also build on their knowledge too. And a lot of the MLAs, they've all been to university, or many of them have been to university, and they're very, very knowledgeable, and they enjoy you pushing them too. And if they don't, they will say, sorry, I'm busy, I don't have time for this. And that's the end of the conversation. That's totally fine too. But many of them do enjoy being challenged as well. And they enjoy the opportunity that, BMS is normally very busy, takes time out to teach and train, and that's very valuable. And I don't think enough people do that. More people should do it. Okay, so moving on, going back to the issue about filling in forms. We're talking about this negative energy and this issue that people have with quality in general. So, do you think this is an actual disdain of quality itself, as opposed to being a reaction to inefficient processes that have been set up in some labs? So, I worked in places where you sign a sheet once to do a task, and then you sign sheet number two to say you've signed it on sheet number one, and then there's another sheet as well to say you've signed the original one to document the completion of the task. So, do you think those inefficiencies that people have, been exposed to are causing them to dislike quality? I know you've mentioned it should be a part of your day to day, and you mentioned about record keeping, but is there an argument that inefficiencies in the lab, inefficiencies in the quality processes, are also causing people to be resentful and angry and annoyed, to put it nicely?
Of course. But again, if you identify that you are having to deal with way too many records or way too many pieces of paper and they are redundant and you shouldn't have to deal with all of those, just make a suggestion or just ask the question: why are things set up this way? If no one can explain why, and you can revamp and streamline the process, amazing. You are bringing improvements to your department, and everyone will be very thankful. Um, we need to remember that most of the labs have been open and operating for a very, very long time. Sometimes there's historical arrangements that someone put in place at some point, and nobody can explain why. And those things that can be moved. If there's that openness, they can improve the processes. There's other things that unfortunately need to be there because there's different sets of standards, different sets of regulations that sometimes require you to do things a certain way, and you need to make sure that everything is following the correct path and that you have all the records that you need. But ultimately, I'll say, without knowing the reality of each of the labs, if you ever come across the impression or the idea that you have way too many things and that maybe you can streamline it, just put it out there, see if the process can be improved. Maybe it can. If not, at least you'll have an answer on why you do things that way, and that will probably help you reduce the frustration that or the feeling that you shouldn't be doing it or you can't understand why you're doing it.
I remember once I asked you a question, and this is going back to when we worked together, and I
And I
was
told
doing
you, shut up.
something along those lines. No. You were much nicer than that. You said it in a much politer way.
Yeah.
So I think the issue at the time was I asked you why we did an NRBC correction when the NRBCs were 5. Where did that number 5 come from? And I remember at the time you said, this has always been the way. And I, and I think you actually went back and you looked to see if there was any evidence of it. And then you came back and you said, I've had a look and I can't find anything. There's something that we need to look at in the lab and, see if we need to change it. I think that was good as well. Some things are the way they are because that's the way they've always been. I think that's the worst thing you can say when somebody asks you, why is something this way? But the fact that you then went and you found and you tried to, investigate why it was, that shows at least there was willingness for change to happen. And I think that's important too. Sometimes change can't be done quickly. It takes time. It takes, personnel. It takes people. It takes finding the reagents, the samples to be able to run to investigate that change, to have the process in place to be able to then implement it. There's a whole lot of things that need to go into it. But there are some things you can change quickly. There are some things where you might find a workflow is inefficient. And if you raise that, you discuss it amongst your team, with your seniors or your quality leads, and then you can say, okay, actually, we can fix this quite quickly. Let's fix it now. But the openness to change, I think, is very important in all of this. You have to be willing to be able to change depending on the situation. Some things you can do quickly and some things will take a bit more time. Speaking of change,
I
sorry.
think just before we move on, I think something very important, and based on the example that you were giving as well, something very important is the ability to say, I don't know, but let's find out together, right? Because we work in a setting where everyone is very intelligent around us. If you just give wishy-washy questions, you will start undermining yourself and you'll start losing respect from your staff. And the next time they have a question, which may be a very useful one and everyone would learn a lot from it, they will just look at you and say, I can't even bother because, the last time this was my experience. So I think there's a great value in admitting when you don't know something. And there's an even greater value in say, let's find out together because everyone has a lot to gain from it.
Yep. And I think in terms of when people come to you and ask you questions, it's important to say, I don't know, not just because, you might give wishy-washy answers and people won't come to you in the future, but also because if they're junior members of staff, they're training, then they may take what you say as gospel. It's always said first
Yes.
impressions last. And if you're the first person they've come to with a question and you've made up an answer, they're going to go with that. And that might then cause further issues down the line. At the end of every sample, we always say there's a patient. And if you're not fully confident in what you're doing because you've told somebody else or you heard it from somebody else and they gave you the wrong information, then that's, just as bad as doing it badly yourself, I think. So it's very important to say you don't know. So that, yeah, go on.
On that topic, just go and check the SOP. Okay, just whatever information you receive from somewhere or someone, just go and check the SOP. If the SOP doesn't include that information, there's a gap there, and you should be raising a change request or discussing it with someone to improve that SOP. But don't just go against whatever the SOP is saying just because someone else told you. If the SOP is written that way, it's because the procedure was validated or verified to be conducted that way. And that's a standardized approach that everyone should be taking. If you are deviating from the SOP because someone in the corridor told you, if it, there will be a matter of it will be a matter of time until something goes wrong, and then the question will become to you will come to you. Hopefully you'll be part of that investigation, and you'll be able to explain, why you chose to do things that way, and hopefully that will give you the chance of highlighting, there's a gap in the procedure. The SOP could have this information. Maybe we need to improve that. But yeah, always go back to the SOP. Your SOP is your main guide. And then if your SOP is not good enough, then just work in improving it. But just don't start deviating from it. And those notebooks, they obviously have values. Those, you always have that older person in the lab that has a massive notebook with loads of precious little details. But if an SOP is changed and that notebook is not updated, then suddenly everyone starts doing the wrong thing and not following the procedure. So just be very careful with that as well.
So when you mentioned if something's missing in an SOP, you should raise a change request. So speaking of change in general now, from a quality perspective, how do you implement change and what role does quality have in changes that happen in the lab? Whether it's a new analyzer, a new limb system, a new change in process, what role does quality have in all of that?
So quality should have a central role in all of that. So, one of the most basic things when we talk about quality in a laboratory setting is continuous improvement. So you need to make sure that you build on what you have. You need to make sure that you are constantly changing and improving your procedures. So all the laboratories, especially if you are accredited, you need to have a change procedure. And that change procedure would basically ensure that you are testing your way, your idea, um, with different stops and different checks along the way to make sure that when you get to the end result and you decide to either reject the idea or implement the idea, you have a set of records that show you, okay, this is the steps that I followed. We ended up making this decision in the end because, yeah, this was great. It's working for us. It will deliver a great service. Or no, we are rejecting this idea because after testing it in this way, actually the consequences that it had weren't really meeting the requirements that we had. But it's very important that you keep records of both, because it's important that if in the future someone wants to revisit that idea, they will know why it was rejected at the time. They'll be able to look through the implementation plan, through the implementation stages, and see, okay, well, they should have done this different, or maybe we can do this different, and maybe this will end up working, and we'll be able to implement it. Or maybe they'll say, yeah, they did absolutely everything they could. It is just not working, so let's not even waste any more time with this and move on and try to implement something else. Um, but it's very important that you are validating, verifying your processes, your equipments, your reagents. Any changes that you make should be based about user requirements, about again expectations, about measuring outcomes, about revisiting your changes to make sure that actually 6 months down the line, let's go back and see, did this actually have the effects that we desired? Is it actually meeting the expectations that we had or the requirements that we had at the beginning? So, you should have a structured change control that will allow you to look into all of these things. I think that's most of it.
Yeah. I think one thing you mentioned was quite good was that negative results are just as important as positive results. You may implement a change, but like you said, it's very important to know why a change wasn't implemented as well. That's just as important. Speaking of change, I'm going to pull up some receipts now. So this is regarding a tweet that I put out back in December. And it was a post from an American physician about standardized reference ranges. And I think I said at the time something along the lines of, they can't come fast enough. This is referring to standardized reference ranges. I'll greet you with open arms. And you replied saying something along the lines of, aren't reference ranges based on a reference population? I then sent you a reply, playing this game of ping pong, but you chose to ghost me at the time. So I wanted to delve a little bit more into that and understand what you meant by reference population, and whether, because I was reading an article once about biological variation and whether it's significant as well. Yes, there are these generalizations that, for example, Asians tend to have microcytic indices when it comes to, the FBC. People from Africa tend to have mildly neutropenic, counts. But is it significant enough for us to have specific reference ranges for these populations? Or, especially when living in a place such as London, where there are people from all over the world here, you've got Asians, you've got Africans, you've got Americans, you name it, they're in London.
How would you know if it's relevant or not? I will answer your question with another question, because the thing is, it will obviously depend on the test. It will depend on a lot of factors. But if we're talking about full blood counts, for instance, I struggle to see how would you standardize globally the reference ranges. Because if you think about it, you can't have one set. Let's just talk about the most basic of examples. How would you create a standardized reference range that would cover babies, children, and adults? Because there's such a variation in between them. What is normal for a newborn is absolutely abnormal for an adult. How would you standardize reference ranges when we are talking about such a wide window of results? So you either consider a lot of things to be normal, or you consider a lot of things to be abnormal. And then either way, you will be treating people or missing treatments because your ranges are way too wide or way too narrow. If you select an appropriate level of the population and you still, you can standardize it on a lower level, you just need to make sure that it is relevant to the population that you have. You are right to say that, London has a lot of different ethnicities, backgrounds, whatever. But that's why it is important that whenever you are establishing your reference ranges, you are blindly running samples from your day-to-day pool of samples, because that's your population. If your population is more from South London or East London or North London, if there's small variations on the pools of samples that you're getting, that will be reflected in your standard ranges. That was only from that point of view. I think there's some guidelines as well that specify that it needs to be from your pool of normal day-to-day samples. But even without going there, just the simple basic fact of how do you standardize such a wide thing, such wide ranges such as an HB? I don't know how that would work in practice.
Sure. I guess my question was more regarding variation between different ethnicities rather than, like you mentioned, neonates newborns, young teenagers, adults, they all have very different ranges. That's understandable. Whether you're a kid in Asia, whether you're a kid in Africa, whether you're a kid in Australia, your reference range will be different to whether you're an adult in the same country, for example. But my question here, I guess it's more of a question. You may not have an answer to this. How significant is the variation between different ethnicities, and is it significant that we need to take it into account, or is it, there is a slight variation, but it's not enough that we need to worry about it?
The answer is that I don't know. Without testing, you don't know. And you only know by keeping testing, and you only know by keeping those reference ranges reviewed and up to date, which, by the way, is also a requirement. You should periodically review your reference ranges and make sure they remain relevant. But how would you know if you don't test it? How would you know if you suddenly just have someone that says, okay, we will standardize these moving forward, these are your ranges? If you don't keep reviewing them, you won't know if they remain appropriate. And if you keep reviewing it, even if they are okay now, nothing tells you that in 50 years you'll end up having to break up again and start separating it because they may be different. So the answer is, yeah, without testing, you don't really know.
Sure. I'm just playing devil's advocate here. I'm not trying to, be difficult. But do you not think sometimes treatments are based on specific cutoffs? For example, a platelet transfusion may be given if the platelets are more than 80. It's a specific number. But a platelet count of 80, lots of things go into that. There's a measurement of uncertainty, which we haven't even touched on yet. I don't know if I want to open that can of worms as well, because that's a whole different conversation. But then when you've got a population made up of lots of different backgrounds and ethnicities where there is the variation in itself, if you've got a range, one range, do you not run the risk of saying, for example, some people might be normal, but others may be abnormal? And like you said at the beginning, when you were explaining the answer to this question first, there's that risk of, some people might get a normal result, some people get an abnormal result, but will that not just cancel each other out? And then you get this average. And do you think
Well,
sorry to interrupt, but do you think
no,
our
that's okay.
treatment ranges need to be more fluid rather than being so strict as well?
Well, but they are. You gave the example of the platelets of 80. When you know that there's deviations for that guideline, there's deviations for those recommendations. Whenever you are talking about very specific patient populations with specific diagnosis or specific sets of treatment, you won't have that threshold of 80 on a patient with ITP, for instance, I believe. So you will have deviations, and they are fluid. I don't even know if the recommendation is 80 is the same for all the populations around the world. So there will be some fluidity. There should be some fluidity as well. We are talking from a lab perspective, but there should be from a clinical perspective as well. They should ensure that they are delivering appropriate treatment to their patients, and no one that shouldn't be receiving the treatment is actually receiving it just based on some inappropriate guideline or whatever that shouldn't really apply to that setup. But I'm not qualified to comment on any of that. I'm sure there's lots of people with more knowledge on that than I do. But I think the approach is, if you have a very specific population, just make sure that you are considering that, and make sure that you are, again, it's about expectations and requirements. Just if you can tailor it to your population, why would you generalize and try to make it easier if then someone in the end is either getting treated for something they shouldn't or missing some sort of treatment that they should have?
Sure. No, that makes sense. I guess my thought process was that London, for example, is a microcosm of the world. There's people from all over the world in London. Whereas if you go to certain parts of even England, or certain parts of Asia or Africa, the population is not as diverse. So for them, it might be easier to. This might be a generalization, so correct me if I'm wrong. For them, it might be easier to make a reference range based on their local population. Whereas when you're living in a place like London, where there's no such thing. Well, I guess there is a local population, but it's also reflective of the whole world in a way, isn't it? Because you got people from all and every corner of the world.
But I believe if you look into the hospitals and pathology labs around London, unless we are all following the same guidelines and not doing our own testing, there will be some slight variations in those reference ranges as well. And then this may be linked to, the sort of populations that you get, because you may be, I don't know, a kidney center or a liver transplant center or whatever, and you automatically bring some sort of populations. But if you're looking around GPs, that should be a representation of your normal population, excluding all sorts of pathological findings that you may have. You'd obviously exclude any outliers. But yeah, it's food for thought, that one, I think, and I don't think there's one size fits all answer. But I think a standardized global approach, I struggle to see how that would be
Sure.
implemented.
I guess going on from this, I guess with pathology networks now moving to a hub and spoke model, how do you think that would work? So if, for instance, some testing might be done in the spoke or the lab within the hospital, and then other testing is done in the hub, and the hub is catering for a large range of different satellite labs, how would you then have a reference range? Would you just have one which is harmonized across that greater area, which covers all those different hospitals? Or would you have a different reference range for each of the different hospitals because they serve different GP populations? The more you think about it, the more complex it sort of gets.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and I think that will depend on the approach that you have on the hub and spoke model. If you decide to go with one accreditation number, you may be only required to have one set of reference ranges, and that may include pulling those samples in the hub, pulling those samples from all the different GPs to make sure that you have um, appropriate reference ranges. But then in the end, as you were talking at the beginning, you may end up having slightly wider ranges. But I don't know. It would depend on whatever approach sites decide to have and on their findings. If they are finding that site A as a completely different results from site B, then it would be up to them to decide what to do from then. But as long as they can justify and as long as they can take and consider the risks to patients, and they have someone from a clinical perspective considering if that those differences are clinical significant or not. As long as everyone is happy in the end, I can't see why there would be a problem.
Sure. So you mentioned accreditation a few times throughout the conversation that we've had, and you get a number at the end of it. Each lab gets an accreditation number. I know, for instance, my HCPC number, I know what it stands for. What does an accreditation mean for a lab, and how does one go, or how does a lab go about getting it?
Well, the accreditation in the UK is only provided by UCAS, so they will be the only body that would be able to give you an accreditation number, right? Pathology laboratories are usually accredited against ISO 15189, which is derived from ISO 9001. So the way they go about it is you basically tell UCAS, I want to be accredited. They'll give you a set of forms and a set of procedures that you need to fill in order to meet the requirements of the ISO. And I believe that then that starts a very close relationship with the assessors, where they will come back and forward and tell you, no, you need to, that's not meeting standard, that is meeting standards, and then it's back and forward until you may get your accreditation or not. But I think it's if in terms of what it means, if you talk about it from a point of view of what it means, of how much you had to put into it to get it, there will be a lot of very passionate people saying, "Oh yeah, this we had to go through so much. I want to keep my number. It means so much to me." But if you talk about it from a business point of view, you need to be aware that if you are a GP practice that wants to have a service level agreement with a laboratory, and you have option A, which is an accredited lab, and option B, which is not accredited, if they want to provide results that they are confident of, they'll go with option A, the accredited lab, even if that may cost them a bit more, it may or may not, they will likely go with option A. Um, if you work with sponsored trials and all of that, most of those trials, if not all, will require you to work with an accredited laboratory. So ultimately, if you lose your accreditation, you may lose your trial or your sponsored trial or whatever. So it may have consequences, financial consequences to you. If you are working within a trust and your contract with the trust says that you need to keep accreditation, if you lose that accreditation, that will always have consequences for you as well. So you need to be mindful of everything that is attached to that accreditation number, all the entities that expect you to be an accredited laboratory, because it's not always as straightforward as that. And sometimes we don't think about reputation, we don't think about financial side of things, but there's all those things attached to it as well.
Sure. So you mentioned ISO. So how does ISO and UCAS differ? For somebody who doesn't know much about the regulatory bodies in the UK and also the accreditation service, what is ISO and what is UCAS, and what's the difference between the two?
So UCAS is the United Kingdom Accreditation Service. So as the name says, they will provide accreditation against all different sets of standards. They don't specialize in pathology laboratories. They provide accreditation into a range of things. ISO is from the International Standards of Organization of International Standards. And they basically produce the standards which will offer guidance on how you should conduct your practice. I called it guidance, but it is a requirement. It may be there in your law, depending on your country, depending on wherever you're coming from. You may have the requirement of, if you are this organization, you need to meet these requirements. Okay, so there might be some legal background that would require you to meet those standards depending on what you do and where you're coming from. But basically, they are different structures, different organizations, and basically, what UCAS does is assess for compliance against the requirements. So whenever you have a UCAS assessor coming to you to visit you, all that they will do is say, we are looking for compliance, we are raising anything that is a non-compliance, and we give you a certain amount of time to address it and to show us that you have improved your services and you are now compliant. If you have the accreditation status, that is sort of a way of assuring your users that they can have the confidence in your results, because you had an independent party coming to assess you and making sure that your quality management system is in place and ensuring that your results are accurate, they are reliable, and that you are providing a good service.
Okay. One of the things that I wanted to touch on, this conversation is getting a bit long now, so I'm going to try and round it off a little bit. 2022 was a big year for guidelines. So first, the WHO released new guidelines for, acute leukemias, and how we moved from the FAB system to the WHO system and how they rearranged that. And also there were new guidelines for ISO as well. How did the guidelines for ISO differ from the previous version? Was it a substantial change? Was it minor changes?
It depends on how you look at it. I believe it is substantial because it focuses a lot more on patients and risk to patients. You basically need to consider risk to patient in everything that you do. It gives you a bit more freedom, because it allows you to sort of, as long as you have a good reason and as long as you can explain and as long as there's no additional risk, you can opt to leave some things behind. For instance, a quality manual, you don't need to have a quality manual anymore. Quality manager, you don't need to have a named quality manager anymore. That being said, you may still choose to have a quality manual because it's the most efficient way of providing that information that is in the quality manual. Okay, for instance, the SOP templates. it may or may not be applicable to every single technical procedure that you are doing. So you may choose to have in some you have A, B, and C, and some others you just have A and C because you don't need B. As long as that doesn't bring any more risk, as long as there's a line of thought behind it, and you can explain why you are doing it that way, you are still meeting requirements, and it doesn't bring any additional risk. It gives you a bit more freedom. But yeah, it basically brings patient into focus a lot more, and it's risk based. So you need to have your risk procedures up to date, and you need to be confident and comfortable with them.
Sure. One of the running themes of this conversation has been change and the inevitability of change as well. And we've spoken a little bit about how you deal from a quality perspective with change. Just wanted to get your views on what's in store in the future. The buzzword for the end of last year and the beginning of this year has been AI. What role do you think AI will play in labs? And also, how will we manage it from a quality perspective to ensure that the things that we do in the lab are still safe for the patients?
Well, that is very hard. That is a very hard question to answer because the reality is that I don't know. If you look at the way that AI has been taking over the world so quickly over the past 6 months, in a year, if they start bringing and implementing that in pathology, sorry, we don't know what sort of things. But if you think about LIMS rules, if you think about trendings and all sorts of automations that ChatGPT is already amazing at doing, it really makes you believe like all the delta flags, all the trending of results, trending of QCs, even digital morphology now. If there's some AI algorithms that start being included in those, that will potentially revolutionize it. So the answer is I don't know, but there will probably still be some place for us to make sure that the AI is doing what it should be doing, and to make sure that we have assurances of the outcome of the processes and that they are still meeting the requirements. So there's still some space for us as biomedical scientists and as quality people to make sure that the outputs are what they should be. But the reality is that I really don't know.
I mean, I guess we'll cross this bridge when the time comes, right? It's one of those things you can't, there's only so much you can speculate into the future. But it is an exciting time because I think nowadays, in today's world, the currency is data. And whether that's, you on your phone, whether that's you on your internet browser, or whether that's you in healthcare as well, all your results, all your investigations, they are pinpoints of data that can be used to be trended together to provide you healthcare specific just for you. And that is where I think the future is going towards, personalized healthcare for everyone. Whether it happens quickly or whether it takes a bit more time, whether there be regulation for it, I don't know. It's one of the things that we'll have to wait and see. But it's quite an interesting time in terms of, how the lab role is changing over time and how we will manage that from a quality perspective.
Yeah, and I think one of the main risks would be that we suddenly implement it and bring it along way too quickly, and then only after implementation we start realizing that maybe it wasn't ready. ChatGPT has been going all over, implemented in all the places. Just recently, we saw on the news about that virtual assistant that started creating music, saying how rubbish the service it was. Right? We saw that there's been some fictional quotations and references in some of the answers that ChatGPT is giving. So it could be very misleading, and we just need to make sure that when we bring it on board, it's not if, it's when, that we are absolutely certain of the capabilities and that it is safe to do so.
I think this is a good place to end the conversation while we're still speculating about the possibilities that the future holds for us. Well, firstly, thank you for your time and speaking to me about this important topic. I think it's been enlightening not just for those who will listen, but to me as well. There were things that you said which stood out for me. I think I'll take them on. So, Paolo, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me. And if you have any points that you'd like to discuss after this conversation, please don't bother me at all. No, I'm just joking. Just you are your public presence on social networks is very noted and known. So if there's anything arising from these, please just be gentle with your criticisms. And apart from that, happy to discuss whatever points we feel that we may need for in the future.
Perfect. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure as always. Thank you.